So in this panel session, all of these people are practitioners across the breadth of human health, and they each have stories to tell and experiences to share. So I'm just going to briefly ask each person in turn, just give a little 2-minute potted summary of how you came to be where you are and the kind of work that you do in 2 minutes. So I'll start with Ingrid.
So I came from a regional country town in Queensland. I grew up in Bundaberg, and I am the first person in my family to go to university. And I was thrilled to leave a country town and come to the big smoke of Brisbane, go to university, trained as a dietitian, loved it, loved becoming a clinician. And then within about 2 years, I think, of working as a full-time dietitian at a big tertiary hospital in Brisbane, it's like my dream job, I was really bored. I was really bored. I was like, is this what it is? Every day it's different, but it's the same. And so it didn't take me long to realize I needed something else. I needed to be curious. I needed to learn something new every day. And I was lucky enough to work with some doctors who were clinician scientists, and they saw something in me that I didn't even know existed. I didn't even really know what a PhD was, to be honest. And so I was lucky really to have people find me and then help me through that process of doing a PhD. And then, of course, that was it. I had a taste of it. I knew research was exciting and interesting and challenging, and brought me a lot of really fabulous people, and it was fun. And so then through that, I then made networks and opportunities to do postdocs within different clinical areas. And then just my career was, I guess, set to my own lab.
That's great. Thank you, Ingrid. That was nice and punchy. There's a few points in there that I'll come back to and chase up on later. So Lara, I'll ask you to do a similar plot of history.
Sure, and I can see from Ingrid we're being honest. Okay, cool. Let's be honest. I came from Perth, not too dissimilar to a country town in the middle of nowhere. Some of you might know where it is. It's out west. So when I went to uni, I legitimately did not know what I wanted to do. I enrolled into science as my first choice, and my second choice was legitimately the arts. I took science, I took basic science. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I ended up taking a microbiology course and decided that infectious diseases were the best things ever. I went straight through. I did my honours, and then I did my PhD, and I had done years of postdocing, and then ended up as a research leader in my own lab, struggling for funding, arguing for funding. And I went similar to Ingrid, is this all there is? And then I thought, I know, I'll do an MD. Best plan ever. That was way harder than I thought it was going to be. So I did an MD, and then I started clinical work, and then I got into a hospital system and also thought, oh my God, is this all it is? So I went back to research. I actually kept my research going the whole time, and I have a new love for the research that I was doing before and still do. It has given me a clinical aspect to my research. It's given me new avenues for my research. And it also, has widened my network, I guess. The networks that we create and the jobs that we do also helps feed into our research networks and vice versa. So I think that having both angles makes you well-rounded, and it can certainly give you a good appreciation for what patients need. And I think at the end of the day, our research kind of needs to be governed by what patient need is and what population need is and global health need is. So that's me.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And that resonates with a few discussions I had with people here today about timing of when to do PhDs, and sometimes you can't control these things. So we'll come back to that as well. Sri, over to you.
Thanks, David. So I came from India. So I grew up in a small village in rural India. Then got into medicine, did my basic medical training in India. And then I heard about some of the good things that were coming out of the Menzies School of Health Research about renal health, and that it can be prevented, or the progression to end-stage renal disease can be halted. So I did my master's in public health through the Menzies School of Health Research and the Northern Territory University, which is now called the Charles Darwin University. Worked on a number of indigenous health projects in Darwin and went to some of the remote island communities. And then I was offered the role as the medical director for one of the kidney disease and research prevention programs that Professor Wendy Hoy was running in the NT, based through the Menzies School of Health Research. And we used to screen entire communities for chronic diseases, right from diabetes, hypertension, chronic kidney disease, and try to find ways to better manage those undiagnosed disease burden in those communities, and came up with solutions that got published in a number of journals. But that kind of set me on a research path where I thought there is a lot more change that I can make through research at a global level, at a population health level, and have been continuing on that research trajectory ever since. And then moved to the University of Queensland, where this kidney disease research and prevention program later morphed into the Center for Chronic Disease. And then I changed track into gynae oncology, where I was the senior research fellow for the Queensland Gynae Cancer Group. And then an opportunity to work in rural areas came up, where my wife had to do a rural training as part of her GP fellowship. So we moved to Gatton for a year, and that kind of changed my perspective about rural health. And there was an opportunity to work as an epidemiologist in a rural clinical school. Took up that opportunity, and the head of school recognized that there is a lot more potential in me. And then he was the director of research at that time, who stepped down, and the position came up for advertisement, and I applied, and then got into the role of the director of research within the rural clinical school. In my role, I kind of oversee research activities across a huge geographic footprint. So the University of Queensland trains medical students in some of those rural areas. So we have sites in Bundaberg, Hervey Bay, Rockhampton, and Toowoomba. So we have a research team based in Rockhampton and also in Toowoomba. We kind of oversee research activities and build research capacity in rural areas across our footprint. And in my role, there is a lot more spot fires that I need to put out, especially when it comes to research. And I do enjoy working in that administrative space, research administrative space. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And again, that touches on discussions I had at lunchtime asking about health administration in addition to research and clinical practice. So what I would say to people is I'm sure our panelists will be available at other times and would be only too happy to answer any questions you might have by email if your specific question doesn't get answered today. So I'm presupposing that everyone will be agreeable to being approached afterwards. So take a photograph of that slide so you know who we're talking about. And then I would encourage you, if you don't hear your question asked today and there's no time, then please follow up with our panelists. Mo, sorry to keep you waiting. It's over.
That's all right. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm an endocrinologist working at the Princess Alexandra Hospital and also work as a research fellow at the UQ. So I finished my PhD about 5 years ago, and my research interest is in endocrine regulation of cardiometabolic health and metabolism. So how did I get to this stage? So I originally from Burma, which is a country in Southeast Asia, for those of you who haven't heard about. So I came over here after I finished my medical school, which was an undergraduate degree, 5 years program. So actually, when I just finished my medical degree, my sister was graduating in Canberra from ANU, and so I visited here with my family, and my sister convinced me to come over to Australia. So that's where I came, and I did full-time clinical training. I knew very early on that I wanted to become a physician, and I wanted to spend time thinking and linking what's presented by the patient with the process happening in the body. So, but I didn't know that, I wanted to do research at the time. So finished my clinical training. I still remember my sleepless nights in Robertson, looking after one of the most complicated, sickest patient in the state. But I realized at the same time that, all the medical advances, you need to come through from research and medical discovery rather than just learning what's in the textbook. So I decided to engage some research in my advanced training year. So I did some cohort study, like case reports. And then, I enjoyed doing those things. And I decided to do a PhD after I finished my physician training. So my primary supervisor was Professor Ken Ho. So he's also an endocrinologist, physician scientist. He's well renowned in metabolism. So Ken was working in physiology of human brown fat at the time, and it was first in human studies. And I thought I would take that on. So it was, I also looked for some opportunity to do some clinical work at the same time. So I'm very obliged to my previous department head, who's actually moved to Sydney now, Associate Professor Anthony Russell, who's actually welcomed me to join the department to do some clinical work. So the PhD, it was, as everyone's probably experienced, it's a roller coaster ride. So there was a number of times when I thought I had enough. And Ken was very dedicated supervisor. So he's actually devoted many hours of his time, make sure that I learn everything that I need to be as a competent researcher. So I was responsible for all the aspects of the project. But at the end, it was all worth it when, you got all the findings and you got to present, and actually got some international recognition and a number of awards for my research findings. So that's kind of sort of encouraged me to continue the journey. And so I started thinking about my postdoc, how to continue my research, momentum after I finished my PhD. So as I was writing my thesis, so I approached my current mentor, Professor Michael Sylvester at the TRI. So he's actually took me in as the research academic in his lab, and I was interested to continue studying that part of the hormone aspect. So he's a global expert in endocrine hypertension and cardiovascular endocrinology. So that's where I wanted to expand my skills. He's been very supportive of me developing and leading new research proposals. So basically, I speak to a few of the molecular biologists and clinician researchers from other disciplines to, develop some new research project. And very blessed to find people, kind, smart people like Ingrid, who's willing to help me realize my research ideas. And so we develop projects which combines clinical and translational research. So yes, we've been managed to get a few fundings, and so that's very encouraging. And so that's basically allowed me to, learn, new skills and new experience as a principal investigator. So there's, just still learning, and I guess we'll just have to see where it takes.
Fantastic. Okay, so now you have an idea of the background of our four panelists today. I think common themes here are lifelong learning, collaborations, teamwork, and mentorship. So I think everyone you've heard speak today has mentioned those in different ways. Some practical questions now. So people have been asking me all day, when's the best time to do my PhD? And obviously there's no right answer, but I might single out Lara to start with, only because yours is a not common experience to do your medical degree after PhD. And I know a few people in the room are in a similar predicament. And so be interested in your perspectives on how that's helped or hindered your research and clinical progress.
Yeah, I knew that question was coming from me because I'm the odd one. So I actually think the PhD really helped my medical training. It made medical training a lot easier because a PhD teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to strategize and how to think and how to problem solve, all things which are critical in an MD. So I was far better placed than my peers in that MD program. That being said, I was also far older than my peers in my MD program, which was quite the shock to me when I first started. But I think, at least from my point of view, I don't think that there is necessarily a right or wrong time. I think there are just pros and cons. The PhD really, really helped me with the MD. It made everything and all my learning, everything easier. My interactions with patients, my confidence with patients, so much easier. All my clinical skills, so much easier, just because I had that critical thinking background. So I think that was a huge advantage. The disadvantages, though, depending on what kind of career you're looking for, if you're looking for a research-based career, your research time and your career starts from the moment you graduate with that PhD, and that's for all your funding. So they will count you as an early career researcher based on that date. So for me, taking time out then to do an MD afterwards puts kind of a bit of a black hole in your research career, and you've got to claim that as a career disruption, which some people recognize and is fine, but other funding agencies do not. So you've just got to think about what you're aiming to achieve. If your real passion is clinical work, then do the MD first and do the PhD later. If your true passion is research, there's nothing wrong with doing your PhD first. It's just about figuring out where you want to go and how that's going to best help or hinder that path.
Thank you. So Ingrid, I know you did your PhD after a moment of self-revelation. So tell us how you came to be inspired to do research.
Well, during my day, don't get me wrong, dietetics is a really great job, and I continue to do it. But looking a little bit further, asking questions around why, and there was a research team who were working I was working in hepatology, working in the liver clinic, and they were working in hepatitis C, and it's really fascinating. And there was space to share what they were doing. So I would hear from them what they're doing. I was interested in that. And they were like, well, I can improve their diet, if that would benefit them. We tell them to go and lose weight, and we tell our patients to go and lose weight, and then they come back 3 months later and they haven't. So it mustn't work. And so then, well, leave that with me. Let me just do it. So it was something I took on like as a hobby, essentially. And then because I showed interest and promise, I think, then that was an opportunity to join a group. So for me, I would say that in terms of when is a right time, it's really wanting to do it, but wanting to do it for the right reasons. I think wanting to do it as progressing your career is always risky because it needs to be at the right time for the project, for the people that you're working with and for. And so having the right team around you is really critical. So ensuring that there are people who are invested in your success and your training is really important. So sort of biding your time to get the right team and the right project is good advice, I think, too.
Okay, thank you. I might get you to pass the microphone across to Sri and to Mo now. So Sri, you came to research a little later in your career, if I understand. So can you tell us how you managed to sustain that, and also the practicalities of doing research in more regional settings as opposed to in capital cities? Because I think, we often neglect our regional colleagues.
Yes. We kind of call ourselves generalist researchers. It's similar to how a GP or a general physician or a general surgeon work. So we have generalist skills in research.
Mm-hmm.
So my day could range from dealing with medical workforce related research in the morning to cancer research in the afternoon. So we cover all the clinical disciplines. That's kind of our mandate to help clinicians working in those regional rural hospitals to build research capacity. So it kind of becomes harder to specialize in a particular area of research. So I can't do research or focus my attention on, say, cystic fibrosis because one of the consultants is interested in cystic fibrosis. So we have to spread our time in such a way that we are able to meet the obligations under the current funding arrangement that we have with the Department of Health. And at the same time, yeah, it gets harder to manage the research infrastructure and the resources that you have to meet those obligations, contractual obligations. So we do it in such a way that we are more efficient and spread our time in such a way that it kind of helps clinicians with their research efforts and produces outcomes that are meaningful and impactful.
Thank you. I'll get you to pass it over to Mo now. So Mo, you're working as a specialist physician, but you're also doing research. So what does your day look like, or what does your week look like? How much time, protected time, do you get to do research, and how much is clinical?
Yeah, so it's in my clinical position. So we have, I'm 0.5 for the clinical role, and I do 0.4 research. So with the 0.5 clinical appointment, there is 0.1 where they call non-clinical time. But I would say that's kind of theoretically speaking, say it's for research and, all the other teaching or admin things. But I would say that you will probably use that time for clinical work, doing, clinic lectures, pathology results, all the different emails and stuff for the clinical. So I think you can't really rely on that time to do the research. So I'm lucky that I managed to get that research academic position with the UQ. So that's where I mostly rely on my research activities. So with the good thing with the research is obviously, as Ingrid said, it's a stimulating for your intellectual stimulation. And, with the clinics, obviously, depending on what kind of person you are, probably with the research, it gives you a bit more flexibility in terms of how you manage your time. And, might spend time doing something on the weekends, especially if you have to apply for grants and start finishing off things. But on the other hand, obviously, you can spend, if you have something urgent family issues or things, then you always kind of, a little bit easier to manage compared to clinical work alone, where if you do full-time clinical work, obviously you just have to go to clinics, and then it will cause problem for the patients, if you have to cancel the clinics or things. And so I guess this is kind of doing clinic and research, it gives you a mix of, flexibility and also intellectually more rewarding. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have a question for all of you to answer, and whoever's first in is best dressed, but I want to hear from all of you. But if you had to look back in time to your undergraduate self and you had to give yourself a piece of advice to make your road easier or better or more successful, what would you look back and tell your younger self about the path that you've got coming forward? Say,
I would tell my undergraduate self, you are smart enough to do research. So I was in a class of incredibly talented, super brilliantly bright people. And they were all way smarter than me. And I was like, oh, research is for those smart ones. I'm just going to get through this degree and get the job that I want so I can start earning some money and get off the poverty line. So I never, ever believed that I was smart enough to do research. And I totally understand now that I am smart enough to do research, and research is more than being smart. It's being resilient, it's being curious, it's being interested in thinking different ways, meeting different people, being comfortable not being the smartest person in the room. They're all things that are really important to do research. And I was all of those things, but never believed I was smart enough. And so that is absolutely a piece of advice I would give myself. And in fact, I didn't get that advice until I was much further down the track. And so that's important, I think.
That's a great insight. Thank you. Lara, what advice would you give to your younger self?
So that's excellent advice. I like that. I think the thing I would tell myself is that the people you meet and the networks you create are possibilities and the opportunities that you might have in the future. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not what you know, it's who you know, because what you know is also important, but who you know is critically important. So those networks are going to be those opportunities, and don't don't have, blinders on for a target. Don't sit there and go, I have to do this, because you're going to miss all the opportunities on the way. It's those things that are sitting at your peripheral vision that might give you the best opportunity. So just be open to opportunities that come your way, I think would be the thing I would tell myself.
Nice, very good. Sri, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Probably I would have moved a lot earlier to Australia than I did.
Okay.
Because the research opportunities were far and few while we were training as medical students, whereas the opportunities are limitless here. So probably that would be one of my best advice that I would give myself.
Very good perspective. And Mo?
Thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I actually never thought about doing clinical research in my career before. But yeah, so I guess it's just just keep the open mind, and then look out for opportunity that will obviously create your career pathway and find the right people. And yeah, so things, I guess that's probably the main thing.
Okay, thank you. Now, I do want to encourage and invite members of our audience as well. If any of you have questions that you'd like to ask any of our panelists or the panel in general, please feel free. So don't be intimidated, and I'm not going to hold the microphone the whole time. So please, if anyone's got a question. Yep. So I'm just going to repeat the question just because we're recording and it may not pick up voices from the floor. So the question was, women are underrepresented in clinician science, and has that been an impact on your careers, and how would you intend to overcome it?
Okay, I guess I'll start. That is a great question. And I didn't think it had an impact on my career until it became blindingly obvious that it really was impacting my career. So I grew up with a really strong father that really, empowered me and my sister. And I really didn't think that there was any differences between gender in terms of opportunity and career. But there is, and it's hard. It's getting less and less. So it's getting better and better. All I can say is that you just have to be persistent and you have to back yourself. I think the hardest thing for women is they don't like to sell themselves. Women, and I'm generalizing, okay, so this is a generalized statement. Please, no one shoot me down. Women tend to be like, oh, I'm not so good at this, or I'm not smart enough to do research. Whereas if you ask a man in general, they're like, yeah, I can do that. I can do this. I can do everything. I'm great. This is, again, please don't shoot me down. I just feel women don't know how to sell themselves. They don't know how to push themselves forward as much. And I think you've got to learn how to back yourself, because you're great. And that's what we just don't do enough. But with that attitude, I think the boundaries that are there are less and less. And I think over time, we will see the opportunities be equal. So.
Yeah, I'd invite comment from others. Ingrid?
Yeah, it's real. It's very real, and it hasn't gone away, but it is getting better, and it's at least acknowledged, and the data is there, and it's being discussed, and there are people who are truly trying to change it, but it takes time to change a culture. And I guess I would say it's important to back other women. So you can find, this happens in society, not just in science, but women can be pitted against each other. It's a highly competitive environment in science and in clinical science. And it's very easy for women to be pitted against each other. And I guess to make a commitment that you will never do that, that you'll always back the other women who are trying equally as hard to succeed in the space and find common purpose in that. So.
Mo, did you want to comment from the sort of specialty side, maybe?
Yeah, so with the gender, I guess it's maybe what you were referring to is maybe the caring responsibility that women's probably tend to have. So I guess that you just probably need to work out the balance, in your life, and the responsibility, career responsibility versus, what you do with the research. So maybe that might be one of the underlying reasons why, the discrepancy, especially when you get to like mid-career stage and things, when women tends to drop off because of those probably increasing career responsibility. But yeah, so I guess just work with the family and work out the time at work and versus the family time, I guess. Yeah.
And I might actually ask Sri, while you're there, just in the regional settings, do you get many female clinician scientists wanting to come through in the regions and in rural Australia?
We often struggle to find clinicians
Right.
to come to rural areas,
Okay.
let alone clinician scientists, David.
Yeah. Okay.
But things are
I hear you.
changing. So we are trying to bring in a culture where we bring in more of clinician scientists to the region.
Yeah.
And one of our priorities is to make them stay. Because retention is often an issue for us. Once they find better opportunities in a metro area, they often move. So what sort of things that will make them stay in a rural area, work in a rural area, and kind of settle in a rural area is some of the research that we do through the Rural Clinical School at the University of Queensland.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's always important to think about what is happening in the regions, because what happens in the cities with childcare and supports and things are often missing in other places. Does that answer your question? Did you have any follow-ups, or you're good with that? Okay. Any other questions while we're throwing the mic around?
Thanks. It's just a comment more for women in research. I know that Metro South research funding has actually got a dedicated grant for women in research. So it takes away that competition of the opposite gender. So it is starting to recognize women in research and starting to prop women up to do more research now.
Great. Yeah, we wait for the mic. We're very rigid here.
I'll just add to that, because I've been involved in research councils and committees at Metro South, so have been there from the creation of initiatives such as that, and you require women around the table to lobby for that, to make that real. And then once it's established, it's hard to take it away, but to create it, you need the women leaders who are sitting around those tables that are then deciding who gets, no, I'm not talking about the review process. I'm talking about the decisions of what categories of grants will be offered. So it's very important for women to be in leadership roles for those initiatives to get up in the first place.
Now, I thought I saw a hand going up. Yes, up here.
Do you want to try this one?
I will give it a go. So a couple of you touched on sort of in describing your journeys through both medicine and doing PhDs, how important sort of continuity is, especially with your research profile, like constantly building that research profile. And I wondered if you, anyone could comment on like how you sort of balance disruptions, whether they be disruptions because of dedicated clinical time, disruptions because of outside family responsibilities, or like sort of Laura's journey where the disruption was you actually completing your MD. How do you balance those disruptions? How do you sort of keep that continuity with your research as you go through, and how does that affect your progression?
So the answer is it's hard. It's really hard. It's hard to do. But, you know, if you're effective at time management, if you really understand what your goals are and, you know, what your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year goals are, how you're going to get there, what's important. So it's always about prioritizing things. It's always about time management, and it is difficult. There's no two ways about it. And if you do take time off, and if you have to take time off, don't hurt yourself about it. Don't blame yourself. Don't get too down about it. There are formal ways of actually recording career disruptions, and there are certain things that for all governing bodies will recognise a career disruption. One of the most obvious one is obviously having a child or parental care. So those things come off your track record as time that didn't exist, essentially. You weren't expected to do research at that time, so it doesn't exist. So just record whatever it is that's causing the disruption, and try and stay motivated. If you're passionate at what you're doing for research, then you're going to find time to do it because you kind of really love it and you really care about it. And if you are struggling to find that time really, you could go back and take a look at your timetable and what you're trying to fit in and reprioritize. Or you could ask yourself, maybe the research isn't stimulating you to begin with. Maybe it's not your field, or maybe it's not your passion, or maybe something on your plate isn't your passion. I don't know, but it's hard. It just is. Yeah.
Yep. No, that's the honest truth. Okay. Any other questions? Another question up here. Yep.
Yeah, so I've got two questions for Lara. The first one is, could you elaborate a little bit more on how you realized and decided to do an MD program, and what specific challenges you had to overcome in the process? And the second one is, you mentioned the importance of personal connections. And so I wonder what advice you could give to someone who is like socially awkward or really introverted. Yeah, thank you.
Great questions. Okay, so your first question is about why I chose to do the MD the way I did. And I can give you the polished answer, I can give you the honest answer.
Be honest. Let's have the honest.
The honest answer is that I was working really hard in research. I struggled to get funding, although I got a lot of funding. It can be thankless and it can be difficult. So that's the tough side of science. And I had a moment where I was like, am I going to be able to make it through the ceiling that women have to get through to be a research leader, to be the top of my field? Am I going to be able to get there? Or am I going to be another really, really smart PhD holder that can't get a job? So I decided to take control of my own future, and I decided to enroll in the MD, and that's the honest answer. The other answer I tell people is that I wanted to be a better researcher, and understanding patients and clinical outcomes is really important. It is. That is true. That's the polished answer I give people. But the reality was I was scared for my job, and it's really hard. Your second question was about how to maintain networks when you might feel socially awkward. I am a true introvert through and through. I just know how to act socially. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to go home, put on my pajamas, sit there in front of the TV and go, oh my God, that was exhausting. And that's because I am introverted. There's no really easy answer. Sometimes it's just going to be what environment you feel comfortable interacting. And if that's online, because you can send an email, you can send a chat, you can send a LinkedIn message, then do that. Start that way. If you then get a foot in the door and have one cup of coffee with one person, start that way. I remember going to conferences and having to go to these welcome mixes and like seeing rooms, like hundreds of scientists, and just going, oh no, no way. I can't do it, like full on panic, can't do it. Sometimes alcohol helps, I don't know. It's hard, but the networks you create start small and they do build. So I would just start small and use the platform you're comfortable interacting on. Yeah.
Can I ask if any other panel members want to add to the networking thing? Because it is pretty purposeful.
Yeah, I feel the same. I'm introverted too. It makes you a good researcher because you can sit all day reading and you have a great day. I just want quiet. And I just want to sit and really understand this bit. And so, introverts make great researchers, but you need diversity in teams. So you need a mix of everyone, but that's very real for me too. A strategy I use, because networking events just are another type of hell for me. And so something that has helped me is to tell myself I have to speak to one new person at this event, or I make a really easy, a goal, because otherwise I'll end up just talking. I did it today. I came into a room full of, I could have talked to any of you, and I found Benny, who I know, and I sat talking with her, which was great. I enjoyed our conversation, but that's what I did. Yeah. Like that doesn't help networking. I can talk to Benny anytime at work. And so giving yourself a goal to say, okay, I'm going to talk to one new person, and you might be strategic and say, I know a particular person's going to be at this conference. I'm going to make a beeline for them at lunch and make sure I just introduce myself. Or you might just talk to a random person who then becomes someone really interesting that then you remember you met them at that conference, and you never know when they might come across into your path and, yes, I remember talking to you, or I don't remember talking to you, but yes, we were at that conference, we must have talked together. So you just really have to put it down as any other goal because it's a critically important part of the job.
And Sri or Mo, did you want to add to that, or you don't have to, but if you,
That's okay.
no, yeah. And I just to back up what both Lara and Ingrid said, I think actually most researchers are pretty introverted, and all of them feel intimidated going into a room. So, but most of them are really friendly people. So don't be intimidated, and they'll usually be so grateful that you have spoken to them about their research and that you find it interesting. So often it's totally different to what you think. You're not going to get your head bitten off. Just talk to people and ask them, and they'll happily, most people will happily talk about their research till the cows come home. You know, that's all they want to talk about. So I think that's a really good question, and it's important that we address the issue of talking to other people. It's really good. I wanted to ask you all, we've talked about opportunities and advice you'd give to younger self, but can you identify particular barriers? I mean, we have heard about the glass ceiling, and we've heard about time management. Are there other barriers that you've identified in your careers where you've overcome them, or striven, whatever, tried to overcome them, worked to overcome them? I think we'd really like to hear the barriers that you've faced. Maybe I'll start with Sri. You've got the microphone. Barriers in your career and how you work to overcome them.
I'd kind of point out the phrase geographic narcissism, which kind of comes into play where there is a belief that things arising out of metro is superior compared to things coming out of rural or regional areas. So that's a major barrier for people to go into rural areas. So when we talk to our medical students, you know, when they say when they want to go to a rural area for their clinical years or training, sometimes people consider it a career suicide. Why do you want to go to rural areas? Because you're going to miss out on being linked to the major metro hospitals, research facilities. So that's a major barrier for us.
There would be geographic narcissism at a state level as well as within the state. So thank you for bringing that up. That's something I hadn't been aware of in that terminology. So Mo, barriers.
Yeah, I guess not necessarily a barrier itself to me, but I guess it's something, it's still kind of trying to struggle and, to see how I can, or, we all can manage is the insecurity in terms of your research position. So I guess that's how you would face, when you do, obviously clinical position, you got a permanent job and you don't have to worry about it. But with the doing research, obviously you really rely on the fundings that you get from the grants and fellowships and things. So far I've been lucky. But I guess that's probably the main challenge that I see, to combine, research. But for us as clinician, obviously easier because you do have the other source of income where you don't have to rely on the research money to live. So, but I guess, so in the long term, how you're going to sustain and maintain that research role and research part, so I guess, it will depend on. I have had some of the seniors people who sort of, when I chatted about how you do that, and when you get to some stage, is there some certainty that you get, the position, you don't have to worry about the funding and things, and when do you stop doing, having to apply things? And he's basically said, you stop when you don't get it anymore. So I guess that's probably, we probably need some kind of change in the system. I don't know how it's going to happen. We do have chat in the within the department, within the hospital and things, but I guess that's how it works with the research. You just rely on the funding to continue doing what you're doing rather than you go a separate position. I was quite surprised to hear, the professor from the gynae fertility professor, he was mentioning about the clinical academic position. in UK, then we was getting clinical plus research automatically, in one role, which I haven't heard of here. So I guess it's probably that's something we need to work on in the long term if we want to maintain, clinician scientists workforce. Yeah.
Thank you. Isaac, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So as you've acknowledged, Australia doesn't have an established clinician scientist track where we have dedicated time for research. So how would, assuming someone has a PhD once they finish medicine, in the next 5 years, how do they actually have the capacity to do research throughout internship, your JHO, SHO, clinical pathway years in that first 5-year period? Is there a possibility there, or is it?
Yeah, I guess it's with the clinical, when you mentioned that, during the clinical training years, I mentioned that I did some research during my advanced training. So that's when you do the full-time clinical training. So unfortunately, it's kind of, just have to come out of your own time to do the research. But I guess if you already had I didn't have PhD, obviously, at the time. So if you do have your PhD before that, then, that could be a possibility where you're trying to find some research fellow position or some funded position. So I guess whether it will allow in terms of the time commitment from clinical training, I guess you just have to balance against what you can do, in terms of doing the research concurrently as a paid job, I guess. So maybe you just have to find some way to continue doing some research as a side things, when you're finishing off your specialist training or clinical training. But I guess after, you finish your clinical trainings, and as I've been doing, you can decide to do part-time clinical and then do the research position. Yeah.
Yes, I think those postgraduate years are the difficult ones. Postgrad from medicine. Lara, did you want to?
I think you'd have to double check, but I think the MRFF have got now fellowships for clinical researchers, so which I think allows you to subdivide your time.
Even in those early postgrad
I think,
years?
well,
Okay.
not internship. Internship's different. You just have to do
your
internship.
house
Yeah.
years, yeah.
But in your house years, as long as you've got a hospital that supports it, I think that is possible. You'd have to double check the guidelines because they change all the time. But the MRFF is one of the fellowships that are one of the only fellowships that are supporting this dual kind of system. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would look into that.
And Sri, did you want to add as well?
Yes, I think the University of Queensland is also trialing 4 clinician scientist tracks. It is still in a pilot stage, and this is probably one of the first years of that arrangement. And depending on how successful this arrangement is, it could be rolled out wider. But also the Royal Colleges have some dedicated research times, some colleges. So if you are in a GP college, they have an academic registrar position where you could spend 12 months of your training doing research, and 50% is focused on teaching, 50% is focused on research. So that's another avenue that you could think about. If it is the RACP, they have some named fellowships where you could devote some research time towards those during your training, postgraduate vocational training. So there are some opportunities, but it's not widely available to anyone, and the competition is intense.
And Mike, yeah.
Yeah, I guess depends on how much you want to commit to research while doing clinical training. But otherwise, if you decided to do part-time clinical and part-time, even during the training years, I guess there might be opportunity for applying for funding if you already have the PhD. The NHMRC investigator grants, they do allow you to apply as a part-time professional fellowship for those things. So I guess these days, you can probably find some kind of fellowship funding. But I guess the question is, whether you would like to do clinical training as a part-time. And there are some part-time positions that, now becoming available. You can share jobs with another person and things, when you're doing advanced training,
And sadly, those fellowships are few and far between and intensely competitive. So it's it's a not an easy road. I don't think anyone today would tell you that research and clinical work, either of them are easy, but the combination is tough. So that's worth being aware of. I am very conscious we're getting to the close of our day. We'll do one last question. I'll just repeat that because we want it on record. So the comment from the floor, thank you for that, was that Queensland Health is moving towards or has already established programs for funding MDs and PhDs in rural settings in Queensland. So sounds like there's momentum in that space and maybe getting better. So that's a really positive bit of news. Now, I am conscious we are getting to the close of the day. I think it's been a wonderful day. We've had a fantastic final session. I'm just going to give each of you a closing minute or so, just to, if any words of wisdom that you want to share, you're not obliged to, but if there was any message you wanted to pass on to potential aspiring clinical researchers, the floor is yours to have a 30-second pitch of some good advice, if you have any.
Yeah, I guess the main thing is this desire, you know, how much you want to actually do the research and how much you're interested in. So that's one of the main things. And then obviously you need to look for the opportunity and plan ahead. So what you want to achieve in the next year, 2 years, and then what you need to be able to apply for funding. So you need to actually work towards that. You know, you need publications or you need some, you know, supervision, some collaborators, projects. So I guess, yeah, you need to plan ahead to be able to get the funding. Yeah.
That's excellent. So passion, strategy, funds. Any closing words, Sri?
I would encourage juniors to kind of get out of the comfort zone and choose your adventure, especially in a rural area.
With Queensland Health, yes. Yeah.
I've actually decided to join rural remote. So everything I'm doing, I've decided that's the path I want because it is interesting people. So let's just spruik it up a little. I got your back, man. I would just say publish. I know that sounds we've all heard it before, but publish, find a research output. If that's not publishing a patent, it's awesome. But, you know, like, let's start small. The second you graduate with your PhD, or if it is your MD to lead to your research career, that is when time starts for you for being competitive. So you really need to look at your research outputs. And if you're not sure of the system that you're trying to compete in, find a mentor who is, and they will guide you from the very first day. And you can use all your research skills to strategize your own career. So use those skills. That's it.
Looks like there's some mentors sitting here. And Ingrid.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. What a great session. Research is really fun. So yeah, it can be really fun, and you get to meet kindred spirits, people who are also curious and interesting and smart, and research. Participating in research brings you around those people, and that brings a lot of purpose to your career. And so, yeah, I just want to leave on a positive, because I think we can get bogged down on how difficult it is, and that is true, but it also brings so much interest. And I've traveled the world through my research, and I've met incredible people. I met my husband through traveling and research. It opens the world to you, and it can be really great fun. So I encourage you to do it.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a fabulous place to finish. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Ingrid, Lara, Sri, and Mo, thank you. Fantastic.